Hi, welcome back to Granny Charlotte's Adventure Stories. Today we're reading Chapter 5 of Little Pilgrim's Progress. But always we have some vocabulary words. So today our first vocabulary word is interpreter. Little Pilgrim meets interpreter on his way. The interpreter is a person who helps explain things. Interpreter. Our second word today is passion. Little Christian's going to meet a little boy named Passion. Passion means strong feelings that can't always be controlled. And another person that Pilgrim is going to meet is patience. Patience means to be able to wait for something without getting angry or upset. There's our vocabulary words for today. Let's get reading. Let's see what happens to Pilgrim today. When the morning came, little Christian felt quite rested and ready for another day's journey. Goodwill brought him out and showed him a narrow pathway which went straight across the plain. "Are there any turnings?" asked Christian. "How shall I know if I've come to a place where there are two roads?" "The way of the king is always quite straight," said Goodwill, "and all the paths that lead out of it are crooked. And the wrong paths are generally wide, while the right path is narrow. If you look carefully, you will not mistake it." "I wonder whether you could unfasten my burden for me," asked little Christian when he was saying goodbye. "I could walk so much better without it." "I cannot do that," said Goodwill. "You must carry it patiently until you come to the cross, and then it will fall off, and you will never see it again." "How glad I shall be," sighed little Christian. "Are there any other houses on the way besides this one?" "Yes, about the middle of the day you will pass the house of the interpreter. He is very kind, and if you ask to see him, he will show you many wonderful things." The morning was bright and pleasant, and little Christian enjoyed his walk very much. The birds were singing so merrily that he felt as if he must sing with them, and the air was so fresh and sweet that it seemed to take away all the weariness that had troubled him in the city of destruction. "There is nothing to hurt me here," he thought. "Worldly did not speak the truth when he said I should be frightened." Just when he was beginning to think that he would like to rest for a little while, he saw a large house standing near the road, and he knew that it must be the house of the interpreter. He went up to the door and knocked, and presently a servant came to ask what he wanted. "I am a little pilgrim," he said, "on my way to the king's city. I stayed at the wicket gate last night, and Goodwill told me that the master of this house is his friend. May I speak to him?" The servant went back and called his master, and soon the interpreter came out. He was an old man with a tall figure and a long white beard, and Christian thought he looked very wise. He put his hand on the child's head, saying, "What can I do for you, little boy?" "Would you mind showing me some of your wonderful things?" asked little Christian. He spoke timidly, for he could not help thinking that, although the interpreter might be pleased to have grown-up visitors at his house, a little pilgrim like himself would perhaps be in the way. "Goodwill told me I might come to see you," he added. The interpreter smiled. "Goodwill is my friend," he said. "Are you one of the king's little pilgrims? Come in, and I will find something that you will like to see." He took Christian's hand and led him into the hall, where the servant was still waiting. The interpreter asked for a lamp, and when it was brought to him, he opened the door of a large room. Curtains were drawn before the windows, but the light of the lamp filled all the room with brightness. On the wall by the door hung a picture, and when little Christian saw it, he clasped his hands and stood quite still. It was the picture of a man whose face was more beautiful than anything that little Christian had ever imagined. He was walking over a mountain path. All around him, among the rocks, grew briars and thorns, which had torn his garments in many places, and his feet were bleeding, for the rough stones had wounded him. In his arms he carried a little lamb. It was tired and had laid its head upon his shoulder, and he was looking down at it with gentle, loving eyes. Underneath the picture, in letters of gold, were written the words, "He shall gather the lambs with his arm and carry them near his heart." And here is a picture of another good shepherd. This picture is more recent, but that's how they take care of their lambs. They carry them over the rough places, and the good shepherd does that for all his little sheep. "Was the lamb lost?" asked little Christian. "Yes," replied the interpreter, "lost and ready to die. Did you not see how tired it looks and how its fleece is torn and soiled? But the good shepherd heard its cry, and he never rested until he found it, and then he brought it home in his arms." "It must have been a hard path," said little Christian. "The stones have cut his feet." It was a very hard path, but he did not mind that because he loved his little lamb. I have shown you this picture first because the Good Shepherd is our King's own son. And just as a shepherd loves his flock, so he loves the pilgrims. The little pilgrims are like the lambs. You can think of this when you are sad or frightened and remember who is watching over you. "I am a little pilgrim," said Christian, looking up at the interpreter. "A little pilgrim and a little lamb in the flock of the Good Shepherd." Well, now I will show you something else. Little Christian felt quite sorry to turn away from the picture of the Good Shepherd. "I shall never forget it," he thought. "The shepherd's face is even more beautiful than my darling mother's." The interpreter took him upstairs into a pleasant room which looked like a nursery. Two little boys were sitting there, each in his own chair. One of them appeared to be quiet and happy, but the other was crying and seemed very cross and discontented. "These two little boys are staying here for a time," said the interpreter. "The one who is crying is called Passion, and his brother's name is Patience." "Why is Passion crying?" asked Christian. "He is a foolish boy," replied the interpreter. "There are some beautiful gifts coming from the king, and the children are each to have their share. Patience is sitting there and willing to wait for them, but Passion is upset because he cannot have them all at once. He wishes to have his pleasure now instead of at the proper time." Just then the door opened and a man came in carrying a quantity of books and toys and pretty things, which he spread upon the table before Passion. The boy was delighted and, wiping away his tears, began to look at his treasures. Among them were some bags filled with bright golden coins, and when Passion saw these, he held them up in his hands and laughed at Patience, who had nothing which to amuse himself. "Passion is very happy now," said the interpreter, "but in a short time all his coins will be spent, and his pretty things will be torn and broken and spoiled. And when the king's gifts come, he will have no share in them. Then he will wish he had waited as Patience is waiting." And here's an old-time picture of Passion and Patience. You can see that Patience is sitting there in the chair, and Passion is on the floor starting to throw a little fit. "Are the king's gifts better than these?" asked little Christian. "Far better. They are treasures that cannot be spoiled, and Patience is very wise to wait for them." "Passion is laughing now," said Christian, "but I think Patience will have the best of it." "I'm sure he will," replied the interpreter. "You must remember that everything I show you is meant to teach you something, and you may learn from this that it is not wise to wish too eagerly for pleasant things until the king sends them. He knows exactly what is good for each of us, and he will always give us what will make us really happy. If we behave like Passion and try to be happy in our own way, we are sure to be disappointed. The interpreter now took Christian out of the house and through his garden to a place from which they could see a beautiful palace not so very far off. The roof of the palace was flat, and upon it a number of people were walking about, dressed in garments that shone brightly like gold. "Is that one of the king's palaces?" asked little Christian. "Yes, but it is not easy for anyone to enter it." Outside the palace, Christian saw a great crowd of men who looked as if they wished to go in but were afraid to do so. Then he saw that some other men in armor were standing around the doorway. They had fierce, cruel faces, and the men who were outside dared not try to pass by them. A little way from the door, a man was sitting at a table with a book before him, in which he wrote the name of anyone who tried to get into the palace. Little Christian felt very interested in all of this, and he hoped that one of the men would be brave enough to go into the palace while he was there. "Why does not the king drive away the wicked soldiers?" he said. "He could drive them away, and then all those people could go into the palace." "He could do it quite easily," replied the interpreter, "but he wishes to see how many of the people really care about entering the palace. Those who love the king with all their hearts are not afraid of the soldiers. We can wait for a little while, and you will see someone going in." So they sat down upon the grass, and little Christian watched the people. Presently a man came out from the crowd and went toward the table near the doorway. His name was written in the book, and then he put on his helmet and drew his sword and rushed in among the soldiers. He fought with them for a long time, and Christian thought he would be killed. But although he received many wounds, he got into the palace at last. And then all the people upon the roof began to sing, come in, eternal glory thou shalt win." Little Christian smiled. "Does that mean we are not to be frightened because the king will help us and take us safely into his city?" "Yes," said the interpreter. "I thought you would understand it for yourself. Now you have seen enough for one day. We must find a little bed for you, and tomorrow you shall go on your journey." Here's a picture of a man who has put on his armor and his helmet and is ready to do battle with soldiers. And I think this could be the kind of fellow that is in our story. Well, that's it for our reading today. Thank you for joining me. Remember, wash your hands, brush your teeth, and eat an ice chip. Today, I'm going to eat a berry ice chip. See you next time.